So guys, in my opinion, Hard Target is one of the greatest 90s action movies. And it's got a great cast. It's full of 90s tropes. I'm going to get into the plot right now. So basically, Hard Target is an updated 90s version of The Deadliest Game. You've got Lance Henriksen and his goons, and they own this company. And basically, for $500,000, you can hunt a combat veteran with a weapon of your choice. And they're in the city of New Orleans. And I have to talk about the setting for just a minute. You know, I like movies that are shot in New York and LA just fine, but when you shoot a movie in another city, like say I Come in Peace was shot in Houston, Texas, and so you get a different skyline, different monuments. I love that when there's something just a little bit different in a movie. And this movie's great. You know, it's on the banks of the Mississippi River. It's down in the bayou. You see the skyline of New Orleans. And, you know, they're downtown by the French Quarter, down those narrow corridors with these two-storied buildings that you see in, like, Deja Vu and this movie, An Interview with a Vampire. I love the setting of this movie. But the bad guys ended up getting this guy named Douglas Bender. And his daughter is actually coming to New Orleans to look for him and reunite with him. And she's having a hard time finding him. And after she almost gets mugged, she gets Jean-Claude Van Damme's character to kind of show her around the city. Eventually, they find out, you know, through various contacts that her father was hunted. And so they go after Lance Henriksen and his guys. So the first and second act of the movie are kind of unraveling the mystery of what happened to her father and a little bit of action. And in that last act, there's just so much action in this movie. This movie was directed by John Woo. This was his first major Hollywood movie, and you can tell there are woo-isms all over this thing. I'll get into that just a little bit more, but you know, the pigeons flying by, and Van Damme seeing bad guys in mirrors trying to sneak up on him, and a few other scenes. You can definitely tell if you know a lot of John Woo's tropes that this is a Woo movie. So this movie's got a lot of great action scenes. That diner scene in the beginning where she kind of flashes her money and the wrong guys see it and they follow her out and kind of rough her up outside of her car. And Van Damme meets them out there. It's like four guys who are armed with knives. It's a very well choreographed scene, you know, where he's high kicking these guys and then he sweep kicks this guy onto the car and then takes him and throws him into the next guy. That's some great action right there. The scene on the bridge, and I'll talk a little bit more about this later, is just so silly. I love it though. You got the bad guys coming after Chance and Natasha, and he gets this bike from this guy, and he's riding it and jumps up in a crouch position, shooting at him, and eventually stands up, and he's like surfing on this bike, jumps over the car, shoots it from behind, and blows the entire thing up. That scene is ludicrous. It's absolutely preposterous, but it's amazing at the same time. You're so busy laughing at that scene that you can't hate it. There's this scene down on the bayou. It's just great. Natasha's up against this tree, and Chance is like, "Do you trust me?" And she's like, "Yeah." And he's like, "Don't move." He grabs this snake, and of course it's hissing and got its mouth open. He punches the thing's lights out, and it just kind of flops over, you know, Three Stooges style. It's hilarious. That scene is another one, like the motorcycle scene, that I just love. And I love the fact that they took the time and the effort to make a robotic snake that actually looks pretty real, you know. And of course he bites the rattles off the thing and sets it up in this tree as a trap for the bad guys. That's another one. It's stupid, but it's so much fun you can't help but love it. The scene at the cabin with Uncle Duvet, played by Wilford Brimley, who's amazing in this movie, you know, where he's got his bow and arrow, and I don't know what he says in Cajun, but it's amazing. I love that character, you know, the Southern Cajun, whiskey bootlegging uncle that, you know, he shoots that bow and arrow and it sets off this chain reaction. There's this huge explosion and bad guys go flying. That's a great scene. And then the final scene in that Mardi Gras graveyard, you know, he goes into that building and he's got like 20 bad guys after him. The odds are like 20-1. And the scene doesn't really make any sense because, you know, he's got like one or two guns with a couple of clips. And he unloads hundreds of rounds into these guys. But this scene is just so action-packed. And I love that it's dimly lit, you know, and you got the firepower and explosions brightening everything up. But you've got these Mardi Gras-like clown faces in the dark. And so it's kind of almost scary. It's very atmospheric. You've got all these pigeons going by, a lot of John Woo-isms there. There's that point in this scene where you've got Van Damme on one side of the wall and Arnold Vosloo, who plays Pick Van Cleef, And this is also a wooism where they're on opposite sides of a wall reloading and mouthing each other. And that's a really cool scene. But that whole last section of this movie in that Mardi Gras graveyard is amazing. I absolutely love all the kills in there. How he disposes of Lance Henriksen with the grenade down the pants. That ranks right up there to me with Yasawa's death in Showdown in Little Tokyo. Just a great scene. I wish he would have died, when the grenade went down the pants because, for one, it takes too long for that grenade to go off, and then he gets it and takes it apart and it arcs and goes off. So to me, that kind of ruined it a little bit. I wish he would have just put it down his pants, kicked him, and he blew up. But still, a great climax to a great scene to end a really fun movie. Jean-Claude Van Damme really shows off his skill in this movie. Whether it's him spin kicking somebody or, shooting a gun around a corner as he dives or standing up on a motorcycle, punching out a snake. He really does a great job in this movie. However, there is a rumor out there that Kurt Russell was actually first in line to play this, but he had already committed to something else. I'm actually wondering if that something else was Tombstone, which came out like the next year after this, which if that was the case, Hard Target or Tombstone, he probably made the right choice there. But how different would Hard Target have been with Kurt Russell as Chance Boudreaux instead of Jean-Claude Van Damme? You got Van Damme, who's very stoic in this. He doesn't say a whole lot. And that's probably because of his lack of grasp on the English language. But Kurt Russell, you just look at that Jack Burton character and some of the other characters he's played. He talks a lot. So how would that have changed Chance Boudreaux? And how would that have changed the movie? I don't know. One of those big what ifs. As far as everybody else in the movie, Lance Henriksen plays the main bad guy. I can't remember what his name is, but he's one of those guys. He could just act out the phone book and it would be amazing. Arnold Vosloo is in this movie, and he plays Van Cleef, and I love that character's name, because I love Lee Van Cleef, the old Western actor. But he is great in this movie. And of course, he was the Mummy later on, and he did a couple of the Darkman sequels, which I actually like, which very few people do. But I always thought that the Bond franchise missed out because Arnold Vosloo would have made a great Bond villain. Whether he was the lead Bond villain or just the heavy that Bond has to take out to get to him, because he plays all of his characters. Yeah, he's kind of a brute, but he's also got this sophistication, and he brings that to this. But I really like the chemistry between Lance Henriksen's character and Vosloo's character in this movie, how they have this business, and there's a respect there for each other. It's very understated, but it's one of those things that when you watch this a couple of times, you're like, man, they're really good together. Wilford Brimley is in this as Uncle Duvet, and I really like his performance in this. It's one of my favorites of his. Of course, I love him as Blair in The Thing, and he's in a couple of different Charles Bronson movies. I know Border Town's one of them, I believe. Just really like Wilford Brimley. I think he's underrated because, everybody sees him and they just want diabetes, But Wilford Brimley is a really good actor. The character that played Roper, he was the friend of Natasha's dad, the GI. He was also a friend of Chance Boudreaux in this movie. He gets hunted, in the second act. And I like the way he acts this character too, because, he's this friendly guy, but when he's there in Poe's office and Poe's like, hey, do you have any family, anybody that'll miss you? And you see just the look of loneliness and despair in his eyes. He says, no, I've got nobody. I really felt that in the movie. And I can't remember that actor's name. He's been in a lot of things, but I wanted to point that out because I think his character is very understated in this movie. I also thought the chemistry between Van Damme and the girl that played Natasha was really good. Usually in a movie like this, they would have a scene and Van Damme would show his butt or she'd go topless, but you didn't need that because the bond that they have in this movie is really good. I love just the sheer amount of firepower in this movie. It's kind of ridiculous. The amount of guns, the amount of bullets they go through, things exploding for no reason. It's a lot of fun. I love in that first hunt, you've got that guy with the gun that shoots the arrows that spin. And of course, there's the close up, and that'd be copied later in 90s movies, but it's a very John Woo thing. And that kind of dates this to the 90s, but it's still a great shot. I also can't go without mentioning the score by Graham Revell, who also dates something to the 90s or early 2000s. But he does a great job here, especially everything's in New Orleans. And there's this whole slide guitar motif that goes through everything. And I mean, come on, guys, look at me. I'm gonna eat that up like Cheerios. But there's some really good musical cues in this movie, and I had to throw that in there because it fits Hard Target to a T. So as far as things on this movie that I didn't quite appreciate, that silly scene where Van Damme, he's standing up and surfing on that motorcycle and then jumps over the car and comes up behind and shoots it. When his stunt double is rolling, you can tell that's a stunt double because the wig is really bad. Van Damme in this movie had extensions to give him a mullet. This is the early 90s. I think this was filmed in 92, so people still had mullets. I think, in this part of the country, people still had mullets until the mid 90s, as sad as that sounds. But even though they've made a comeback, his stunt double, you can really tell it's just a bad hairdo. But yeah, that whole bike scene is just stupid and makes no sense whatsoever. But like I said, it's awesome. The snake scene, people could look at that and just cringe. But a movie like this, I'm not going to take it that seriously, so I can't get down on it too much. You could really pick this movie apart by, how many bullets did he fire in that last scene and how many times did you actually see him reload. But come on, guys. It's a Van Damme movie. You didn't watch it for that. But in conclusion, guys, I love Hard Target, and I'm guessing if you clicked on this review, you probably love Hard Target too. And kudos to you. You have great taste. I'm going to rate this thing. I don't think it's quite a 7.5, but it's really close. I'm going to give it a 7.4. This movie's a lot of fun, and I don't know anybody that would put in Hard Target and be like, man, that was terrible. I had a bad time. People, you just don't say that. If you're watching this review and you're new to Jean-Claude Van Damme, you're like, man, I want to watch a Van Damme movie. I would choose this or Universal Soldier or Bloodsport. Those are probably his big three. I've got a movie outside of those big three that's actually my favorite Van Damme movie. That's another video for another time. It's very underrated, and people don't think a whole lot of it for some reason. But it's a movie with a lot of heart, and I'll get there eventually. I might do it this winter. But yeah, Hard Target would be a great entry for somebody who doesn't know a lot about JCVD movies. But if you haven't seen Hard Target in a while, guys, check it out. It's one of those movies. Check your brain at the door, get a brewski and a pizza, and watch it on a Friday night, or really any night. Guys, I got a lot of cool things coming up. Next week, I got a review for Anaconda, and that's a lot of fun. Got a big announcement I'm making next week, too, so be ready for that. And then the week after, I've got Night of the Creeps coming, and then I've got a special video coming to open up August, so stay tuned for that. And maybe I'll throw in a little Tommy Lee Jones in August, too. You never know. I've got a lot cooking on the sci-fi and action, and a little bit on the horror front, so stay tuned, guys. As always, be sure to like and subscribe. I've been Andrew, and I'll see you down the line.